The legal thunderbolt struck the media landscape with seismic force, a $900 million defamation lawsuit that media insiders immediately dubbed the Silenced First Lady's Revenge Tour. Melania Trump, the Sphinx-like former occupant of the East Wing, had transformed overnight from reluctant public figure to legal warrior princess, wielding her complaint like Excalibur against the ramparts of daytime television. This could be the largest defamation lawsuit to ever make the media establishment soil their collective Armani, whispered a courthouse insider watching, as clerks processed paperwork that would soon set phones ablaze across Manhattan's media kingdom. $900 million? That's not a number you throw around unless you're either insane or incredibly serious. Mrs. Trump is definitely not insane. Inside ABC's glass and steel fortress, the afternoon sun cast long shadows as executives performed what crisis managers term financial catastrophe calculus, that frantic mathematical gymnastics when corporations suddenly face nine-figure liability exposure. Conference rooms transformed into war rooms, with the View suddenly less about coffee mugs and hot topics and more about corporate survival. "She was never going to stay silent forever," remarked a former White House staffer, requesting the journalistic witness protection of anonymity. People mistook her quietness for weakness, the classic predator's miscalculation. The staffer paused, lowering their voice to conspiratorial levels. Melania doesn't just enter battles, she choreographs them like deadly ballets where only she knows the final movement. The lawsuit, filed during what began as an unremarkable Tuesday at the federal courthouse, carried the precision timing of a military strike, surprising the enemy during their complacent midday routine. Legal experts gathered like soothsayers around the filing, divining its significance between sips of overpriced espresso. This isn't merely litigation. It's a declaration of war against consequence-free character assassination, declared Alan Dershowitz, his bow tie seemingly tightening with each syllable of constitutional analysis. The media has long operated in the privileged space between opinion and falsehood. Mrs. Trump just redrew those boundaries with nuclear precision. Behind closed doors at The View, production assistants engaged in what staffers called comment archaeology, the desperate excavation of transcripts to determine exactly which verbal hand grenade had finally provoked the former First Lady's wrath. Sunny Hostin, meanwhile, maintained her on-air composure while reportedly cycling through the 5 stages of defamation grief backstage. Denial, anger, bargaining, panic, and finally frantic calls to her insurance provider. The question hanging in the rarefied air of media boardrooms wasn't whether blood would spill, but whose, how much, and whether 9 figures would be enough to stanch the wound. As network executives stared at potential balance sheet apocalypse, one undeniable truth emerged. Melania Trump had mastered the art of revenge served at precisely absolute zero. The match that ignited this 9-figure inferno was struck on what had seemed an ordinary Tuesday broadcast of The View, that daily ritual of caffeinated commentary where the line between opinion and character assassination has long existed in a state of televised quantum uncertainty. Sunny Hostin, ensconced in the protective bubble of the ABC studio and surrounded by nodding co-hosts and a sympathetic audience, leaned forward with what industry insiders call the pundit's certainty. That peculiar confidence reserved for those pronouncing judgment on lives they've never lived and marriages they've never witnessed. "Let's be honest here," Sunny declared, her voice carrying the unmistakable cadence of someone who believes microphones confer omniscience. "Melania Trump clearly hates her husband. She's just pretending to love Donald for the financial benefits. That's not a real marriage. It's a business arrangement with occasional photo ops." The studio audience, that Greek chorus of daytime television, erupted in what producers term validation applause, that Pavlovian response when liberal-leaning viewers hear a conservative figure deconstructed. Sunny's co-host performed synchronized nodding, that choreographed affirmation that transforms conjecture into perceived consensus. "My sources close to the Trump family tell me she can barely stand to be in the same room with him," Sunny continued, despite possessing what fact-checkers would later term a complete absence of actual sources. Her voice carried that television tenor that transforms gossip into apparent gospel. She's counting the days until she can cash out. What Sunny and her producers failed to notice was the silent viewer in Palm Beach, the subject of their casual character dissection, watching with what those who know her describe as Slovenian stillness, that deceptive calm that precedes calculated action rather than emotional reaction. She crossed a line that day, explained a confidant of the former First Lady. Questioning someone's politics is fair game. Questioning their marriage, their love, based on a feeling, that's when Melania decided enough was enough. In the days that followed, while The View continued its daily ritual of political pontification, a different kind of production was underway. Melania's legal team, a collection of litigation specialists with the collective demeanor of chess grandmasters, began assembling what they termed the Accountability Archive, a meticulously documented history of hosts' on-air statements about the Trump marriage. Opinion is protected by the First Amendment, explained a constitutional scholar following the case, but stating as fact that someone hates their spouse and is only with them for money without evidence, that's potentially crossing into defamation territory, particularly when you have millions of viewers taking your words as truth. The most damning aspect of Sunny's commentary wasn't just what she said. It was the absolute certainty with which she said it, as though she possessed some secret marital surveillance system in Mar-a-Lago. This wasn't presented as speculation or possibility. It was delivered as established fact from an authoritative source. As video clips of the segment spread across social media platforms, where context goes to die and outrage comes to multiply, Melania's silence was misinterpreted as weakness by those who had never understood her fundamental nature. The former model had spent decades in an industry where timing is everything, and this time she was timing her response for maximum impact. Meanwhile, in ABC's executive suites, nobody yet felt the tremors of the legal earthquake preparing to reshape their financial landscape. Sunny continued her daily appearances, unaware she had just lit the fuse on what one media attorney would later call the defamation detonation of the decade. When news of Melania's legal lightning strike first penetrated the hallowed halls of ABC, Sunny Hostin performed what crisis management experts term the cavalier dismissal, that reflexive minimization of threat that often precedes catastrophic realization. Her initial reaction, captured behind the scenes by what insiders describe as increasingly nervous production assistants, was a masterclass in misplaced confidence. "Can you believe this?" Sunny reportedly chuckled to her makeup artist while preparing for the next day's broadcast, performing what body language experts call the defensive hair fluff, that unconscious groom behavior that betrays growing anxiety beneath projected calm. Another Trump tantrum. They love playing victim almost as much as they love their golden toilets. Inside the View production offices, that bustling hive of deadline-driven activity was now buzzing with new urgency. Staff members exchanged what workplace psychologists identify as concern glances, those silent communications that acknowledge potential danger while maintaining professional composure. Yet publicly, the show maintained what media strategists call the invulnerability illusion, proceeding as though nine-figure litigation was merely an inconvenient backdrop to their regularly scheduled programming. Mrs. Trump needs to understand that in America we have this little thing called the First Amendment, Sunny declared during an off-air conversation with colleagues, her voice carrying what voice analysts identify as faltering bravado, confidence undermined by the subtle vocal tremors of emerging doubt. "My opinion is protected speech. Her lawsuit is going nowhere." The ABC legal department, that institutional immune system designed to protect corporate bodies from litigation infections, began what attorneys call transcript triage, the emergency assessment of exactly what had been said and how defensible those statements might prove in court. Their preliminary findings prompted what HR professionals recognize as the urgent weekend meeting, that rarely positive gathering that suggests normal business hours are insufficient to contain a growing crisis. "The problem isn't that you expressed an opinion," a network attorney reportedly explained to Sunny during a closed-door session that witnesses describe as increasingly tense. "The problem is you presented speculation about her marriage as established fact, without any sourcing whatsoever." That's potentially where the vulnerability lies. Sunny's facial expression during this explanation reportedly demonstrated what psychologists term realization dawning, that slow-motion collapse of certainty as consequences come into focus. When the attorney mentioned the $900 million figure, Sunny exhibited what medical professionals identify as acute financial vertigo, that dizzy sensation when threat assessments suddenly include additional zeros. "But what can they actually do to me?" Sunny asked, her voice performing what linguists recognize as the hopeful diminishment question. seeking reassurance that threats are smaller than they appear. The attorney's silent exchange of glances with network executives answered more eloquently than words could have. As the days progressed and legal documents circulated among increasingly concerned ABC executives, Sunny's on-air demeanor underwent what behavioral analysts call subtle withdrawal, maintaining professional poise while strategically avoiding certain topics with the precision of someone navigating a verbal minefield. Behind the scenes, however, staff reported increasing instances of what coworkers termed the backstage blame game. "Why didn't any of you stop me?" Sunny reportedly demanded of production staff during what meeting specialists classify as the accountability deflection session. There was a legal review before this aired. "I'm not going down alone for something the whole show participated in." Meanwhile, in Palm Beach, Melania Trump maintained her characteristic silence, that strategic absence of public comment that communications experts identify as vacuum creation, allowing opponents to fill the silence with increasingly panicked speculation. As Sunny's confidence began its slow-motion collapse, Melania's legal team methodically assembled what trial attorneys call the evidence mountain, an overwhelmingly documented case designed not merely to win but to obliterate opposition. The question hanging over ABC's offices was no longer if they should worry, but precisely how worried they should be. While Sunny Hostin performed what public relations experts term the ostrich maneuver, that futile attempt to make threats disappear through strategic ignorance, Melania Trump executed what military historians recognize as the silent offensive. No tweets, no tearful interviews, no public hand-wringing, just the cold, calculated deployment of legal artillery with Swiss watch precision. "Mrs. Trump doesn't telegraph her punches," whispered a former East Wing staffer, speaking in the hushed tones of someone who had witnessed the former First Lady's strategic mind at work. "She studied her opponents for years while everyone underestimated her." That wasn't patience, it was reconnaissance. Within 72 hours of Sunny's on-air proclamations about the Trump marriage, Melania's legal team, an assemblage of litigation specialists with the collective demeanor of cardiothoracic surgeons, delivered what courthouse veterans call the thud, filing a complaint so substantively heavy that clerks claimed it made an audible sound when placed on the docket counter. "This isn't just a defamation claim," explained a legal analyst reviewing the documents. "It's a meticulously constructed argument that the View and Hostin engaged in a pattern of deliberate character assassination masked as commentary." They've documented years of statements establishing what litigation strategists call malice architecture, showing this wasn't a one-time slip but a constructed narrative designed to damage. Inside the 87-page filing, what document specialists identify as the overwhelming approach was compiled. Melania's attorneys had gathered what evidence experts call the media pattern proof, documenting dozens of instances where The View had targeted conservative women with personal attacks that went beyond political criticism into character destruction. The document demonstrated what legal scholars term the premeditation principle, proving these weren't spontaneous remarks but calculated character strikes. "Most plaintiffs file emotional lawsuits," noted a veteran media attorney not involved in the case. "This isn't emotional, it's surgical. The Trump team spent months building this case before anyone knew it existed. That's not reactive litigation, that's a planned operation." The massive financial demand of $900 million represented what negotiation experts identify as the shock number strategy, not because they necessarily expected to receive the full amount, but because the figure itself would force ABC into what corporate defenders call existential response mode, where settlement becomes more attractive than risking company-threatening liability. "Look at the brilliant timing," observed a crisis management consultant studying the case. "It was filed on a Tuesday afternoon, giving news cycles maximum time to build through the week, submitted to the court division with the judge most likely to allow discovery to proceed, and announced through channels that ensured both conservative and mainstream outlets would cover it simultaneously." This wasn't just legal action, it was a media operation. Melania's legal team issued just one public statement, a masterpiece of what communication specialists call restrained aggression. It read simply, "Mrs. Trump has allowed her filing to speak for itself. The truth has been systematically attacked. Now, the truth will have its day in court." The former First Lady maintained what behavioral experts term strategic invisibility, disappearing from public view precisely when curiosity about her reached its peak. No interviews, no statements, no social media posts. This silence, what media trainers identify as narrative starvation, forced news outlets to focus exclusively on the legal merits rather than personality conflicts. She's using silence as a weapon, explained a veteran political strategist. By saying nothing, she forces the View to fill the void, and with every defensive statement they make, they potentially dig themselves deeper. It's psychological warfare disguised as litigation. As legal documents circulated through media organizations, journalists noted what document analysts call the deliberate breadcrumb trail. Subtle hints in the filings suggesting Melania's team possessed additional evidence they hadn't yet revealed, creating what game theorists term the uncertainty problem for ABC's defense strategy. Meanwhile, The View continued broadcasting a surreal exercise in what communication scholars identify as pretended normalcy, while behind the scenes, ABC executives began what financial planners recognize as worst-case accounting, the grim calculation of exactly how much damage a losing verdict might inflict. The lawsuit ignited what media scholars term the validation wildfire, that rapid spreading conflagration of public reaction where everyone simultaneously feels their pre-existing worldview confirmed. News alerts pinged across millions of devices, transforming ordinary Tuesday dinner conversations into impromptu legal seminars conducted by suddenly expert amateur attorneys. Breaking. Melania Trump files $900 million defamation lawsuit against The View host, screamed chirps across cable news networks, triggering what audience researchers identify as tribal sorting. This immediate polarization occurs when viewers instantly choose sides based on political identity rather than legal merit. Conservative media outlets performed what journalism professors call the victory lap preemption, celebrating a legal triumph not yet achieved, as though the mere filing itself represented vindication. Finally, someone holds fake news accountable. Trumpeted headlines across right-leaning platforms, their anchors barely containing what body language experts recognize as anticipatory gloating. This isn't just about Melania Trump, declared Tucker Carlson, his signature expression of puzzled concern reaching maximum intensity. This is about every conservative voice that's been smeared, every traditional value that's been mocked, every American tired of being told what they can think by daytime TV royalty who've never set foot in real America. Meanwhile, liberal media performed the equally predictable dismissal dance, that choreographed minimization that transforms significant threats into apparent trivialities. Trump family files another frivolous lawsuit, announced progressive publications, their analysis performing what rhetorical experts identify as the context strip, removing all background that might legitimize the complaint. Social media platforms experienced what data analysts call the opinion supernova, an explosion of hot takes so dense and numerous, they created their own gravitational pull, drawing even reluctant commentators into their inescapable force field. A single tweet captured the conservative sentiment with viral precision. The View defends women only if they vote blue. What surprised media observers was the emergence of what political scientists term the unexpected middle, that rare phenomenon where some sentient commentators acknowledge potential merit in a polarizing case. "I'm no Trump fan" began dozens of viral posts performing what rhetoric specialists identify as the reluctant concession format. But Sunny really did cross a line here. Claiming someone hates their spouse without evidence isn't commentary, it's character assassination. Legal experts populated cable news panels like medieval scholars debating scripture, performing what television producers call the certainty contest, competing to see who could express the most unshakable confidence in predicting an inherently unpredictable judicial outcome. This case faces significant First Amendment hurdles, insisted one constitutional law professor, demonstrating what debate coaches recognize as the academic hedge, appearing authoritative while including sufficient qualifications to claim correctness regardless of outcome. "Don't be so sure," countered another legal analyst, exhibiting the classic counter-certainty technique. There's established precedent distinguishing between protected opinion and factual claims about private matters. Stating as fact that someone hates their spouse without evidence, that's legally treacherous territory. The lawsuit transformed Melania Trump overnight from what cultural anthropologists identify as the silent cipher, a figure defined primarily through others' projections, into the defamation avenger, suddenly representing every public figure who had bitten their tongue while media personalities deconstructed their personal lives. Even some longtime Trump critics found themselves experiencing what psychologists term the dissonance dilemma, that uncomfortable realization that someone they dislike might occasionally have legitimate grievances. "I've criticized Trump policies for years," admitted one liberal colleague in a surprisingly nuanced analysis. "But maybe we should reconsider how we discuss public figures' private relationships without evidence." Behind closed doors at ABC, marketing specialists conducted what corporate strategists call a reputation damage assessment. Emergency focus groups measuring how the lawsuit was affecting public perception of The View and whether advertisers might develop what sponsorship analysts term association anxiety. Meanwhile, Melania Trump maintained her characteristic public silence, an approach that media trainers identify as the strategic void, forcing others to fill the emptiness with speculation that often reveals more about the speculators than the subject. As the lawsuit dominated headlines, one undeniable reality emerged. Win or lose in court, Melania had already achieved what image consultants recognize as the perception pivot, transforming her public narrative from passive subject to active protagonist in a single strategic legal stroke. The perception pivot hit like a freight train. Melania's silence was deafening, but Sunny Hostin was scrambling fast. The media storm the former First Lady unleashed didn't just ripple, it roared. Headlines screamed, tweets flew, and millions watched as Melania Trump flipped the script from quiet spouse to legal juggernaut, leaving ABC's Golden Girl clutching at straws. Sunny ducked and dodged, but the heat wouldn't let up. That $900 million lawsuit wasn't just a number anymore. It was a guillotine blade dangling over The View's neck, and Sunny felt every inch of its edge. At first, she tried to play it cool on air, sidestepping Melania's name like it was radioactive. "Let's talk about something else," she'd say with a tight smile, steering the show away from the firestorm. But behind the scenes, chaos reigned. Sources close to ABC spilled the tea. Sunny was leaking excuses to the press faster than a sinking ship loses water. "It's all a misunderstanding," she reportedly told a reporter through gritted teeth, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Just a little mix-up. It happens all the time." A mix-up? Sure, tell that to the nine-figure price tag Melania slapped on her reputation. The bravado didn't last. Panic set in when the legal call started. Late-night meetings with lawyers turned into marathons of dread. "They can't pin this on me personally, right?" Sunny demanded.